si alguien habla en español en el auditorio, por favor de venir hacia mí para poder interpretar. Gracias.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda, Section 2, Public Information.
Do you have anyone that would like to come up, speak? I guess it's a no. All right. Next item.
Okay. Next item, Mr. Chair, would be Section 3, our budgetary items, 3.01, to discuss the superintendent's FY18 estimate of needs and the 2018-2022 CIP budgets.
However the board would like to do this, we have printed copies. We also have it projected on the screen. However, we can move the tables. You guys can come down front, or you can sit where you are. It's completely up to you. Do it. You got that? You have a manual. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. You ready? Okay. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board. Thank you for allowing me to continue our FY19 operating and 19 through 24 capital budget work session. Tonight, or today, we have, this is going to be our revised calendar. I'll try to provide one of these every time that we meet. The first item I'd like to, as we did on Monday, continue to provide additional information, things that you've asked for, and continued clarification of items that we've discussed. So I'd like to do that first, and then continue on with the school board's priorities. And the goal with that, of course, is to make sure that the school board and the administration and the public all understand the intent to make sure that we can price those items. And then ideally next week at the Wednesday work session, you will vote and say these are things that we think are important enough to put into the budget that we're going to send to the mayor and city council for funding. So that's what we're attempting to do today, is to work through those priorities, and we'll see how far we get. And you'll see the remainder of the calendar, try to finish next week if we can, and then at this moment, the school board is scheduled to approve the budget at the regular meeting on February the 20th. Of course, after that, we will move to send that to the mayor. So the first thing that I'd like to talk about is some information that we all got on Monday night, and that was the superintendent's 100-day plan. And specifically, a couple of things that I would like to bring to our attention with regard to budget. Under number 2, equity, which is page 3, you'll see I've highlighted the items that identify a highly respected external partner to conduct an equity audit. I remember Ms. Page said this was music to her ears. I think we would all agree with that. Something that needs to be done, and I sincerely hope that we will get someone that will help us work through that. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means. The second one is on the next page under item 3, excellence. And you'll see we've highlighted engage Council of Great City Schools to conduct an audit of the RPS budget. Again, something that I think we are all anxious to see. I've put in a next few slides to talk about some things that have been done in recent past. The first one, just after you came on board, you probably knew that the bellwether report had been issued about 6 months before you came onto the board. I made no secret of the fact last year that much of that report, while I didn't think it was necessarily inaccurate, I thought the way that it was presented was not consistent with the way that school divisions in Virginia look at their data, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. However, the intent of the project, I think, was very sound. And you can see at the very bottom, it says, working definition of success, the community and RPS have a shared understanding of the RPS budget and a platform for engaging stakeholders in future decisions. That's great, and I certainly hope that part of what we go through with the new superintendent's 100-day plan will look at some similar aspects. However, when you look at page 6, as an example, the bellwether report looked at categories of spending. You'll see the 73% talks about school leadership and support, classroom instruction, and those are very different things. They're important, but they're different items. It goes on to, you'll see with the 11, the next column, you'll see 11%, where attendance and health, transportation, nutrition, and other student services are pulled together. Those are very disparate items. Those are typically not compared together. You would typically compare transportation to transportation, nutrition to nutrition, much like over in the final column where you see technology and operations and maintenance. Most of technology, of course, supports instruction. That's what school technology does. So back to just some recent memory of what was reported and why I hope these new reviews that we do will yield some better information. However, this one slide I do find somewhat telling. It talks about only compared to our peer districts, which is not a very large comparison. However, it talks about Richmond spends about $2,200 more in instruction than our peer districts. And that's true. The question becomes, especially when we do our equity audit, are we spending it the right way and in the right places to get the most for our money? But it does talk about the fact that while we spend more money, the bulk of it goes into instruction, which on the surface is a positive thing. And you can see that compared to our peers, we spend less in central administration. I use that as a segue to page 8. Many of you, and I've printed all of this, I'm sorry that on the screen it's hard to see. Many of you have probably not seen this report. This was the Robert Bob Consulting Group report that was done about 5 years ago. I bring all of this to you as a preference for what I want to talk about in just a couple of minutes. Yes, ma'am.
On the last slide, if I just want to make sure I follow. So you were saying that with a short, yes, one more back. That the shortcoming with this bellwether report is just that the comparisons are not traditional or standard? So could you, I'm sorry, could you explain again in the classroom what is not typically included in this?
I can. Generally, in Virginia, looking at direct classroom expenditures is a category unto itself, and instructional support is a category unto itself. And even more than that, when you look at your support, looking at the other three towers or columns, looking at those as a collective area of expenditure is not typical. We would measure transportation against transportation. For example, Richmond spends about twice as much per person, per student in transportation compared to our neighbors. And of course we do, because we provide before school transportation, after school transportation, after student activity transportation.
Right.
And we need to do that because so many of our students wouldn't be able to participate if we didn't provide that.
I follow that. So transportation would be typically seen as separate, wouldn't be grouped together with school nutrition, for instance.
Right.
But I'm wondering, in the first column, what is not typically in that column?
Typically, you wouldn't put support staff and school leadership in that
Yeah.
same.
Okay.
You would look solely at classroom instruction.
Got it.
And we're going to talk about that, and technology probably is going to keep us from doing part of this exercise today, but I still will talk through it.
Got it.
And again, I don't in any way dispute the accuracy of your numbers. I just think that the information that came forward from that probably wasn't as useful as we hope that these next two reviews will be. But continuing on to page 8, this is the Robert Bob study. I bring this to you because things that were looked at then are similar things that are looked at now. But this was done with a different lens, and I'm going to talk about not in any way to not validate this report, because what this engagement was to talk about how to cut the budget. It was for a different purpose than realigning the budget. So for example, this very first item that says a reduction of 138 kindergarten through third grade teachers would save the school division about $2.5 million of local match funding once you back out the state portion. I can't imagine we would consider that in a million years. But I bring to you the importance that Jason, our new superintendent, has said about doing a new equity audit and a new audit of the budget. So work has been done. I don't know that it has yielded the outcomes that we would like. Certainly some of these, and I bring this to you for your review, for your background only. We're not going to delve into this too deeply today.
Thank you, Ms. Myers. So, to your point, Robert Bob's report, his reduction to the school's budget, a lot of those reductions were below the SOP.
Yes.
The standards of quality.
Yes.
So, the point I want to make, that reduction is below the standards of quality. If our children are to achieve the success, academic success that we so desire,
Can't do that.
Can't do it, and it's unacceptable.
Yes, ma'am. I couldn't agree more. So I won't go through all of this today unless you would like to. I certainly bring it today as background to lead up to what I'd like to talk about now. So if we go to page 11, there we go. Something I talked about the first night of the budget introduction, but I think it's going to become important as we work through the remainder of the budget work sessions and we have a school board approved budget. This talks about how we look to our school schedules, in particular at the secondary level, looking at the master schedules, and how we staff. And this goes to the heart of the equity audit. So this is a practice that needs to be improved and may be implemented to its fullest, but it certainly has got to be improved. This is not an unusual practice. Once we know what students have requested, in particular at the secondary level, that should happen around February, ideally, maybe not quite as early as February, we should have, maybe March, we should have folks from every area of the school division at the table working with the principal and assistant principal, possibly the counselor, to work through that master schedule and make sure that we are staffing that school correctly and appropriately for that school's community. That's what we should make sure. And I'll pause for 1 second before we go to the next page. We're going to look at some very large items. We talked about programs and are they successful, large dollar items that we want to talk about potentially realigning or repurposing. And that's what the next page is going to be. The reason that I talk about this process with staffing, part of what I wanted to show today are the high school master schedules and the teachers that teach those classes. The standards of quality say that in middle and high schools, you can have a class size of 24 to 1. And on the high school block schedule that we have, that means you could teach 120 students a week or all year. We have some teachers that teach that many. We have some teachers that teach 80, we have some that teach 60, and we have some that teach 30. The equity audit will dig into that. But we should do that ourselves. That's what this slide says. We don't need an outsider to tell us how to do that. We need an outsider to help audit that, but we don't need an outsider to tell us how to do it. So we are going to tackle this in March. Same.
Do we have that kind of, do we have that kind of data for our
We do.
secondary teachers?
In fact, we have it with us. It's on the laptop and it's in a pivot table where we can go dig into all the detail we want. Unfortunately, again, the way that we're set up tonight, I don't know that I can do that for you. I certainly can send you that information. I do want to make sure that it is as accurate as it can be. We have looked at probably 15 teachers across different schools that have extremely varied teaching loads, which can be for a variety of reasons. Certainly, you could be a department chair, for example, and you would have a lesson teaching schedule. Right. Some folks that potentially teach, say, 3 or 4 sections of an AP course, maybe have fewer students than others that maybe teach a 9th grade regular English class. However, there are large enough swings in that we need to do 2 things. 1, acknowledge that there's an equity issue that we need to dig into. 2, also understand that at the standards of quality at 24 to 1, and you can teach 120 students, we don't staff that way. The most that we staff is 22 to 1. However, when you look at our staffing at the secondary level, it is substantially lower than that. And the question then becomes, is that where we want to spend our money? And that's what you guys, I keep hearing from you. You talk about programs and looking at how to realign and align. That's why I wanted to bring to you today really what's at the heart of this discussion. So that, yes ma'am.
We're talking about the equity audit now, specifically because it'll be a line item in the budget?
We're really talking about you will approve a budget before any of that work's done. You'll approve a budget in essence 10 days,
Right.
give or take. That work's not going to happen for months. What I'm trying to tell you is some of this alignment, this equity work, will be done anyway. It won't be done before you approve a budget on February the 20th. So at least by next week, we'll have to figure out what does that mean. How do you guys want to put this budget together? First thing we've got to do is continue to work through all these items. And then we'll decide what we're going to send to the city for funding. But I want you to know that work towards this alignment and this equity will occur as an internal practice. We've already identified that. And while some of that has gone on in the past, it needs to be substantially enhanced. So that's what I bring to you. And also, again, just the recognition of, I know we all want there to be a silver bullet or some silver bullets of these items that aren't important, we're going to cut those and we're going to put that money somewhere else. I'm going to show a page of $20 million of items that we can eliminate next school year. A lot of them are instruction and they're not going to be pleasant, but we'll talk about them. So we talked about programs and what can we look at, and that's what this next page is. I just wanted to preface this discussion by saying the bulk of the money that we spend that's over and above what others spend is actually in instruction, and much of it is in the schools.
Right. So when we do talk more about the equity audit, because it seems like we're talking a lot about staffing allocation, which I know specifically with some of the specialty schools that the staffing allocation is different.
It is.
But I think that the staffing allocation issue is also related to other variables such as the size of our schools, and et cetera. So I have some hesitation in putting umbrella over that message is, equity piece because it's operational and there are a lot of other logistics as well. And then too, as we're thinking about the equity audit, the other piece that I think is really important to be looking at is the availability of certain courses, the availability of after-school enrichment, the availability of space and gifted things, which hasn't been touched on yet, but I think to me that's the big piece to make sure we're included in that.
Thank you. You and I are, we're hand in glove with our discussion today. The next set of information that we're going to talk about has been prepared by our instruction folks. One of them talks about the advanced classes in some schools and not others. So that's a piece of information you have today.
Ms. Gibson, regarding the equity audit, so Mr. Cameron will be able to explain that in further details.
So, yes ma'am.
I just wanted to be clear that I know when we talked about looking at programs, when we talked about creating efficiencies and repurposing dollars, yes, I understand about the equity audit, but we also wanted to look at, yes, programs that worked, and I think the intention of the board, and I believe the intention of the board, is to look at efficiencies to see what we can put into the classroom, put into instruction, because that's where it's needed. So I just want to make sure that we are having that type of discussion.
Let's move to page 18, and back up one. I don't know, again, I printed these, and I don't know if everyone has their copies. If you don't, I have copies. Or if you can see these, I can certainly read through them, or I don't think we're in a position to make that picture any bigger, I don't think. So what I will tell you is this is a combination of some instructional items and some non-instructional items. What this is not is a list of positions that we're going to cut out of payroll and accounts payable and purchasing and human resources and the superintendent's office and the school board office. It is not that. These are programs that can be eliminated for next school year. So at the top, this is the vendor account temps. We spend about $200,000 a year on temporary support, and primarily in the benefits office, in the HR office. We can remove that.
What's the function, why we have it, is it, and so if we go,
That's what I'm going through right now. Thank you. So So these are temporary employee dollars that are used in the benefit process to support human resources. So to eliminate that would mean the functions that these people are doing would be absorbed in the benefit process. So could it be eliminated? Absolutely. The next one is called advanced programs. This is my belief, because we have a significant amount of turnover, I think that we had a lot of functions that were not getting performed, primarily because people would leave, the folks who were there probably didn't receive 100% training, and there were tasks that were falling behind. So we brought in folks to help. We have made some strides with that with Mr. Pager, Sergeant, and others. So we are in better shape in human resources. Of course, Mr. Pager is leaving. I was in the process of leaving. So we'll have to work through that transition. But we had functions that were not getting done, so we brought in temporary help. I think that at some point, one of the things that we talked about is, can we eliminate some of these part-time jobs and part-time salaries? At some point, that needs to become the expectation, that we've got to train people completely to do their jobs, and we don't need these temporary part-time outside support services. So this one is not special or unique. It is just something that we spend that we could eliminate. I can't tell you that we would have the same level of service and productivity. Most of these things, if we eliminate them, we won't. These are not silver bullets. These are simply, if we have higher priorities, these are things we can remove and put those dollars to other priorities. No, ma'am. Absolutely.
All right, because in that particular area, because HRD still has done very well, it still has some more.
Yes.
So I'm thinking that in terms of maybe not 200, but having something there, because things happen.
And you make a great point. These are in no way recommendations for reductions. These are just simply, you guys had asked for programs. These are programs. And I will take just one more second. When we define programs, we have an element that we track programs. We're required to by the state. But the programs that we track, in my opinion, are not what you want to talk about. We track regular education, special education, gifted, CTE, music, art, PE. Those are not the things you want to talk about. I believe the things you want to talk about, many of them are on this sheet. And if they aren't, you'll need to share with us the things that you do want to talk about. So we tried to capture as many as we could think of. And if there are others, help us.
I think you might have kind of answered my question, but so they're not recommendations. So as it relates to the HR 10s, Mr. Pager would advocate to keep that.
In my opinion, he would, yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Much like almost everything on this list.
Okay.
So someone in the school system will advocate for all of these.
Okay. I guess help me understand how these things rose to the top of the list if folks wouldn't advocate to. Is it just sort of how did you decide to put these things specifically on the list if they're not recommendations in any way?
Yes, Dan, thank you. I appreciate you asking that. This is the whole population of what I could identify. If there's anything else, I don't know how to identify it. Yes, ma'am. A couple below that. Yes, ma'am.
Quick question. The RCEA,
Yes, sir.
is that grant expired?
It is expiring, and
Is that what, 7 year?
It is. It was basically split 400 and 300. But now it's going to be all locally funded. Should you decide to go forward, that serves about 35 to 40 students, as you know, at John Marshall. Again, something I'm positive people would advocate for.
Right.
But we're talking about priorities and decisions. So
So you're going to go through
I would like to do that if that would please the board. So again, as you look through the large supplemental information book, you'll find most of these things pretty readily. The advanced programs, college career readiness, that is just supplemental local funding that we use to support our schools. That is not a required program. Again, people in this room would advocate strongly that we could not remove all of that or even a significant portion. What I'm sharing with you is your legal requirement. Allaview is something that we just implemented because of the state MOU. One of the issues with the state was that we were not tracking and reporting well to the public or even to the state how we were using our grant funds and how the expenditures were matching to the outcomes of the grants. This piece of software is specifically designed to do that. It has no other use at this moment. It could have a great use at the school level.
And this is probably a sidebar conversation because I don't know how the software works, but is there an application, could it scale up to include at the school level so it's relevant to more than just grants?
Thank you, Brad. Absolutely. We've actually programmed it now that the entire set of our financial information flows into it. It has dashboards, it has graphics that the public can use about how the school uses their money. It can go in and look at real live expenditures from each school. We have the ability to even put the activity funds into this piece of software. Again, it is a graphic design, unlike our regular financial systems, kind of the old green screen. This is very user-friendly and certainly something that could be expanded. At this moment, it's only being used for the grant reporting stuff. It wouldn't. In fact, it's an automatic feed. It's something that we would feed every night. In fact, that feed has already been set up. But thank you for asking that. It does have a wide application that we could use. But again, not required.
So just as you noted with Allaview, as we're going through this, could you let us know, so it's my understanding that these are items that are included now in the upcoming budget.
They are.
And so, but I'm presuming, like, for instance, like the Yale Initiative, that's something that wasn't there last year, so this is an additional thing that's been added to the budget this year?
It's in the current year. It's in the current year budget.
It is in
the 18 budget, yes.
Yeah, that we're working on right now.
No, that's the 19 budget. It's in the current year budget, and at this moment, it's also in the 19 budget.
Okay, because I met with groups of folks, and I don't think that they thought that it was included in the budget.
It has been included, yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And I will just, not necessarily, I'm the advocate for this. My understanding, that's an excellent program.
Yes, I've heard. Okay, so yeah, so as we're going through this, if you could just note, if it's an increase from the year prior, if there's any changes, that would be helpful.
Yes, ma'am. None of these are increases in the next year's proposed budget. These are the amounts that are currently in place. The next one is pretty straightforward. This is what we pay to send kids to the Appomattox Governor's School. Yes, sir, we do. Again, almost every one of these is going to have some advocate in this room. Band instruments and uniform maintenance, I would think that that's...
So the number of slots for the academics.
34, 34?
I think it's 58.
You think it's 58? 58? Okay. Could be as many as 60. We have 15 per year, just depends on how many, you have, maybe your graduating group is only 14, so your incoming group would be 14.
So is there a cap right now in slots?
I don't know if they have any available slots. I think they do have available
No,
slots.
what I'm saying for RPS.
Yes, ma'am. Each year, right now it's 15 new ones that go in each year. Yes. I don't think that the uniforms and the instruments need any discussion. I certainly think that's something that is desperately needed in the schools. Camelot certainly is a discussion about a program about its productivity and effectiveness.
What year are we in for the band instrument and uniform maintenance?
I don't know who's getting 100,000 this year. Do you remember who's getting 100,000? No? I'll have to tell you.
But, I mean, what year?
It has. It's 15,000 for all the comprehensive schools, and each school gets one of the schools gets 100,000 and it rotates. I just don't know who gets 100,000 this year. I want to say TJ, but I could be wrong. I don't. I can find out.
Has this been properly been in place at least?
2-3 years anyway.
Yeah.
Second. Okay.
That's all.
Okay. Athletics, this is the third year. The band is the second year. Yes, ma'am. This particular 160, I think, is only band and uniforms. Isn't that correct? Yeah. Band uniforms and instruments. Yes, ma'am. Is a separate item. Unless it was an oversight. Yeah, I must have missed it. It was just an oversight. I tried to give you a complete list. I'll certainly have that to you tonight. Yep. I'll give you a complete list. Yes, ma'am. I thought athletics was just 100,000. I didn't remember the 15. It's the 15? Okay. I just didn't remember the 15. It is. The next one, I think, is, albeit the discussion around this can be very convoluted, I think it's straightforward. This is the Camelot contract. Yes, sir. It is the company that we pay that primarily runs the alternative school. They provide teachers and security and administration. We also have some teachers and other staff at the alternative school, but we pay them $2 million a year to basically run the school. Does that represent to us or for them? No, not how many people are in the building. What do you want? I don't know how many people.
You hear me? 150. So they do a great deal of work around wraparound services for children. And so I will say, and if it's not appropriate, you can tell me to be quiet, but there is a need for additional instructional supports there, or working with the company to provide higher quality teaching staff in that building. The wraparound services, and maybe Dr. Boyd or Mr. Jeffers can also respond. The wraparound services and all of the counseling and things there have made the building a much more effective place for those children. You know, before there were a lot of things going on, but when we look at instructional practices there, that's an area that needs to grow tremendously. They hire the teachers, yes.
Many of which are from out of state, so they're relatively new with SOL instruction. And so as Ms. Sophie said, that whole case will come from Camelot.
they don't offer the same teaching salary that we offer.
Yes. Of course.
So we're spending $13,000 per student approximately at RAS for Camelot, but then we have additional costs that we incur.
We do, yes,
So
sir.
the transportation obviously would be one. Are there other costs that we incur, that RPS incurs? Food service and security.
And I think we have 17 staff there. I think that's not, it's 14 or 17, one, two. Yeah. Mhm.
So they're wearing multiple hats.
Six through 12.
In need of support emotionally, or this is with children that were paneled out, or? So we spend $13,000 per student.
We spend much closer to 20,000
Per student.
Yes, ma'am.
So they stay there for what, 1 year, 2 years, the whole time? How does that work?
Good evening. So in the Spartan Academy, the alternative program that's actually located at Richmond Alternative, that program is for students. They can come through two ways. They can be referred to our alternative placement committee, and that's where principals, school counselors, persons, anyone can recommend that a student be placed in the alternative school based on grades, behavior, and or attendance, accumulation of things if they're not being successful in their comprehensive settings. Students can also be placed at Richmond Alternative through our hearing office for violations of SCORE. And students are typically there at least 1 9 weeks. At the end of the 9 weeks, students are reviewed, and if they've made progress, students are transitioned back to their comprehensive settings. So we just had a number of students to return to their comprehensive schools. So that's for the actual Richmond Alternative program that's run by Camelot. Within that same building, we also have ISAP. So those are for students who are younger than 18 that are trying to pursue the GED, and they have to meet certain reading thresholds and things of that nature. And then thirdly, we have Aspire that's located in our Richmond Technical Center. That program is also under Richmond Alternative, but that's another program that students are referred to. That's for overage, undercredited students, some of which may also be court involved or have other family obligations of parents. And so those students are on an abbreviated schedule.
The next one is Commonwealth Strategies. I think we're familiar with them at this moment. Communities in Schools is a program obviously we've had for a while. It's in many of our schools. I think they're in about 13 or 14 now. That's correct. I think that's right. Are they more than that? Yeah. They're not in all of our schools. I certainly can get a list from Mr. Fitcher. Council, yes, sir. There are, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Council of Great City Schools, of course, we participate. We're not required to. The behind-the-wheel component of driver's ed, we're required to do the classroom component. Students could be required to get the behind-the-wheel on their own. We have a locally funded, 100% locally funded extended day tutor. These are stipends that we pay to teachers to work after school or outside of regular school hours to assist our students with reading and other services. Yes, ma'am.
So this is from the general fund budget, but
It-
we also fund tutors from like Title I.
We do, and from the state.
And from the state.
Yes, ma'am. Both federal and state.
Is this,
I believe their stipend is $20 or $24 an hour. 22. It would be driven by hours, I think.
There's, the schools get a, amount of money based on enrollment and need, and, they create their leadership team at the school creates an extended day program or a Saturday program for remediation. And so then they budget out how many tutors. So one school might hire 4 tutors, another school based on need or issues may hire a different. So it's, I mean, I can get you the number, but it's not, that's not the way in which it was intended. The school gets a certain amount, it gets amount of money, and then they create an extended day plan based on their needs. And they submit that plan.
Elementary and secondary, or
Yes,
just primarily?
yes, all schools get, because see, you have to understand that not every school is a Title I school, so they don't have any money for tutors, and not all, and then Title I funds are depending on how much we pay for staff. Not every school gets the same allocation of tutors for Title I. And then the only other tutoring that is provided is through the federal funds that we get for our 13 priority schools, and then some of our focus schools have additional tutors, and you have 7 focus schools. So the extended day money was an opportunity to provide all schools with the ability to have tutors. So we also give tutors to Open and Community in Franklin, but in their accredited schools, but they also have needs around prep for AP, SAT prep, all of those other things, or for a child that may be struggling there in an area that also needs assistance.
My only question regards, do we do any kind of pre-test, post-test with the participant students to assess if the tutoring achieves any results?
So we have benchmark testing, our own testing throughout the year, but the school has some metrics that they use to select the children based on either a benchmark or an assessment that they've given, and then they have a way to monitor the outcomes of the students, yes.
Ms. Cosby and Ms. Gibson, you've asked a question throughout a couple of these meetings about resource alignment and coordination with federal, state, and local funds. This would be a classic example of trying to make sure that we leverage those 3 pots of money, because we do. We have tutors that are paid from all 3 levels. The next one is a piece of software, Forecast 5 Analytics. As you can imagine, it is an analytical piece of software. To the best of my knowledge, only a couple of people in the school division use it. If they were here, they would advocate strongly for this, because this is a piece of software that pulls data, instructional data, primarily from school divisions around Virginia, and in particular from our region, to help us compare how we look to our peers and our neighbors. Again, it's not a lot of money, and not very many people use it. Gallup software helps us with recruiting. It gives us a picture of regional recruitments. It helps us with how we need to make sure we're competitive. Yes, yes, sir. I don't think we use the Gallup survey instrument, but I'm going to look at Mr. Sargent. We don't use the survey instrument, no, sir. They provide us information about hiring in similar urban areas or in the region, jobs that we want to make sure we're competitive when we're trying to hire teachers and others. So they provide information for us. We don't use the survey. Yes, ma'am. We did used to use the survey.
As a way to determine whether or not people had the attributes to work in urban environments and actual schools. So it was used maybe 8 or 9, 10 years ago as a tool by the HR department to work for match. And they also used the leadership they also used the Gallup for leadership.
Thank you. Okay, we will. Looking to Ms. Raga to see if she's able to take notes.
Yes, I can't hear the microphone helps.
Okay. If we can just get the details about what we're using the Gallup contract for.
I just add,
Based on my cursory view of the different budgets, it feels like there's a lot of little things like this. Maybe right now in a week it's not possible, and maybe this is better suited for the larger audit, but I would just love to see a list of all of our software and the number of users, and sort of that, some kind of KPI efficacy of these various software tools, because I sent an email, it feels like there's 30 plus, 40 plus little tiny $20,000, $30,000 contracts, and I just worry that we might have too many software tools out there, and wouldn't it be better to pool that money into a couple of really good tools that everybody really needs? Obviously, Let's Talk is like a hot button issue, but I personally, we all personally, I think, I don't want to speak for the rest of the board, but I hate it, and I rarely use it, and it's $100,000,
Yes.
and that's a really good example of something that we just shouldn't be.
We can certainly provide you the software and the users. That's something obviously we keep with technology. The KPI will be a little longer project.
I would reiterate what Liz said, and as a parent too, it just seems like there's a lot of softwares that don't talk together as well, and so, this is a lot of discussion that isn't even necessarily specific to the budget, but it's like, there's a new system for where the buses are going to be, and then there's Aspen, and then there's the mobile app for communication, and then there's the open enrollment thing, and then, the website, and so, and I can imagine, again, as a teacher, it's overwhelming, and as an administration, it's overwhelming in some of these systems, and I'm sure there isn't a system that is more, there's probably someone too in IT that would know how to be able to integrate those things and perhaps eliminate them to make it an effective landscape for everyone. But that's just my two cents on that.
Right. Yeah, it's certainly I agree with where you're going with this. I don't know how quickly all of that I can get in front of you, but I will. I just don't know how quickly I can do it. Thank you. The next one is the software that we use for the students at Aspire. Those students are at. This is just a piece of software. It's called Graduation Alliance. Yes, ma'am. It's okay. I'll ask Dr. Boyd. What's that? Software for Aspire.
So they use it as Aspire and other places.
Can you use the microphone?
It's a software program that they use it, not only at Aspire, they use it at Armstrong as well now. It does self-assessment, where is the student at this time, and then the software adjusts the instruction from that point to help the student complete the course. It takes assessments throughout the way and monitors the progress continually where that student is. So it's the tool that's used for the 80 maximum students that we can Aspire, as well as throughout the division.
So is it like credit recovery?
Aspire was designed primarily for credit recovery, yes. It can be for initial credit. It does work for initial credit. It works for multiple credit. That's why we're using, like I said, Armstrong now, using it for some credit classes underway.
Using it at Armstrong or the PLC Center at Armstrong? I just want to.
PLC is now at WIT and RPC. They're not a center at Armstrong.
Oh, it's not a center at Armstrong. Okay.
And they use
That was.
the program.
Yes, ma'am.
How many students are we serving in Aspire?
The maximum number is 80. It varies, of course, in the afternoon session, which we try to enroll our students who are
On average?
probably
On average?
Yeah, probably about 40, 48.
Is the contract a number of licenses based on the number of kids?
Yes,
or
it's number of
classes?
license. It's a license number. That's how we're able to use the program in other sites.
So do you know what the total number of licenses?
I do not.
I could send you two copies of the contract.
Three.
Yes, ma'am.
In terms of the effectiveness of the program, how many young people are graduating, how long it's taking them to graduate, how many of them are getting their, they're supposed to be receiving some type of certification, right?
They receive a diploma. They earn a diploma if they complete their high school diploma.
No, I thought it was also in addition to the diploma, they were supposed to be put in some type of certification program.
No, that, one reason we placed it at RTC was the hopes that students would certainly take advantage of that. They have an AM session and a PM session. So a morning session student ideally would take one, but it's not a requirement for them. The Aspire students, you recall, are students that without Aspire, they're going to drop out. So it's a last-ditch effort to try to help these students get to where they can graduate from high school. They graduate with a diploma with no certification.
Understood. I'm going to go back and look at some, I thought that was how it was presented before, that was one of the unique advantages of Aspire, in addition to the credit recovery and getting the diploma, but also the certification.
So are we saying that we no longer have PLC?
PLC is operated by Communities and Schools, and it is at 2 locations, Richmond Technical Center and also at WITH School. And there are students that PLC controls their own admissions, but those students that are attending PLC are RPS students, still their home school. They transported in.
So you're saying they're at Georgeville and Richmond Technical Center?
Yes, ma'am.
So what happens to the one that?
What is PLC?
It's a program that Communities and Schools runs, uses a different software program to help students that are near graduation, but maybe job, family issues have interfered with their education and it's a chance for them to graduate. They have a pretty high success rate. They have to take a pre-screening test before they admitted to the PLC program in math and reading. And if they support a certain level, PLC will admit them, but they do remain a student of the base school. So they are graduates of their base school. They don't stay at PLC, and PLC can send them back to their own school.
Good afternoon again. Mr. Myers has pulled out and may help, because I know we're talking about a lot of different programs interchangeably. We do have a number of alternative programs. In this page, I know you probably think of PLC and Aspire. A lot of that sounds alike, and they are credit recovery programs. But as Mr. Jeffers said, one of the reasons that Aspire was created was because a number of our students who were struggling, overage and underaccredited, were not able to meet the entry criteria for PLC because of their reading levels. So if you look on your spreadsheet that outlines the criteria, there's a table that outlines all of our alternative programs. I think Mr. Myers said he passed it out last meeting.
We gave this out Monday night. We briefly talked through the alternative programs. I brought more copies for everybody tonight.
And so PLC has a 7th grade reading level requirement, and a number of students were not meeting that. And again, they weren't being successful in the comprehensive school. So at Aspire, they're able to do the online credit recovery program, but also have access to core content area teachers and special education teachers, and it provided them a unique, flexible schedule instead of having to go to school all day, which many of them had significant attendance challenges as well. So those are some of the quick differences between PLC and Aspire, but they do both focus on credit recovery for a similar population.
Isn't PLC online as well?
Yes, ma'am. So they're all a blended learning model, so that you have some staff there and that you have the coursework online.
Madam Chair, could I ask a quick question? We have someone from the audience who would like to ask a question. Are you entertaining that now, or would you like to do that at the end of our discussion?
Yeah,
At the end. Could you please hold to the end?
So the PLC is
included within the 343,000 for communities and schools?
It's not, that's the amount that we pay communities and schools.
Okay.
Continue. That's the amount we pay communities and schools. So I'm gonna look, this was more for us, I think. Yeah. It wouldn't include that. Those people, we pay that. This is specifically what we pay to communities and schools.
So we pay for PLC separately?
We do, and I'll have to get you that number.
Okay.
I'd like to go back for one moment, if it's okay with the board and Mr. Superintendent. We could go back one slide, if that's okay. I'm only going to stay there for 1 second. And I'm just going to remind you, when we talked a little earlier about working through our own internal efforts about looking at schedules and looking at staffing and the excitement around the equity audit and the excitement around the budget audit. The next thing we're going to talk about is how do we determine how we want to staff our schools? We talked about the master schedules. Unfortunately, today the technology won't allow us to show the disparity that's in the staffing numbers. So I'm going to go back now to all of the programs and other items that I thought we wanted to talk about. So you'll see this talks about high school staffing at 22-1, and the 2 pages behind this, we're not going to go there now, talk about if we change that staffing to that level, what would it mean? So for high schools, that would mean we would eliminate 25 classroom teachers. Again, these are not recommendations in any way. These are simply areas that if we wanted to identify higher priorities, areas that you could move money. And you'll see the 2 biggest items on here, or almost the 2 biggest items. This is one of them. Not going to continue down that path any longer. There's a lot of work to do in that area going forward. You'll see the next 3 talk about our IB program.
So what's the current staffing ratio?
We are, we're at about, not including special education, we're at about 15 or 16-1.
In high school?
Secondary schools, I'm sorry, middle and high. This 25 doesn't include any centrally allocated positions that are not actually allocated to a school. We have some positions that we don't allocate, that we don't budget to a school. They're allocated centrally and then they are assigned to a school based on need. So these 25 are only teachers that are identified at that school. So it would not include any of those other teachers that are centrally budgeted.
For example, Title I.
Oh, so sorry, it doesn't include Title I or any grant-funded teachers. This would be ESLs, some gifted
Music and art, some arts.
art, resource.
Split people.
Yes. Yes. Across the board, it's about 10 or 11-1 on average. And when we talk about these numbers, folks that are in schools will look at me and say, "You've lost your mind. The ratios are not nearly that low." What I'm telling you are the positions that we have in our complement. How they're allocated in the schools is something that the equity audit, I hope, is going to help us with.
Another question about the IB. Are the teachers receiving the cost? Those are FTEs.
Yes, ma'am, they are.
So my next question are we training our teachers to teach IB? Because I know when,
I'll have to look to our instruction folks about the training.
right, because Brown switched over, and I remember when the board voted for the IB program at Chimborazo. And I know the training is expensive, the teacher turnover, is that still
So
being addressed?
the principal's gone, the new principal's gone to training, the teachers have, been attending training. We've scheduled online training to help support their kind of on a sustained way. So, we do have regular opportunities for those teachers to be trained.
And that's throughout the district, secondary and
Middle and the MYP program and,
Two quick questions. So the Brown and Jefferson, those 12 and 8 are FTEs. Are those like in addition to what their normal complement is to support the IB program, or what is that?
It is. I will tell you though that,
So I just want to make sure I'm clear. So
yes,
like
they are in
they
addition.
get their normal staffing, and on top of that, there are these positions for IB.
They do, but what I will share with you is, if we look at TJ, they are not going to have as small class sizes as some other schools, and it's not specifically because they're not Title I, which they are not. So they don't get a Title I allocation. But as far as I know, it's not been on purpose, but they have larger class sizes than the other 4 comprehensive schools.
Got it. So that's right. Because I was just at TJ, it didn't look like they had like 12 extra teachers for them. Yeah, okay. So second question is, and I know this isn't exactly a budget question, but just very quickly, like how are these schools chosen for IB, and was there a point at which we were gonna like become an IB district, or was it this is like willy-nilly and we'll leave it there and all? Yeah.
I was a principal at that time, the thing came downtown. So I'll just tell you that I believe that under your leadership, that you should revisit and study how IB is implemented and how you want it to run. It was started at Brown because there was a need for, parents wanted a different option for their middle school children. And so IB was the option that was determined that would be placed there. And then of course to grow, we were hoping that there was going to be a pipeline to Jefferson. But in reality, if you look, not all the children that started Brown in the middle years program moved to TJ. The Chimborazo program was an outgrowth of parents in that area of town wanting for IB. Ms. Berkman can speak to that. And so it was a grassroots effort from the community and with the school to move that to an IB elementary school.
Thank you.
And that listed amount for Chimborazo, that's just for staff, that does not include staff development.
It does not, it's just a one position.
It's the
So
coordinator.
where is the professional development? That's placed in another line item.
It is. Professional development, I'm really glad, I know you're talking specifically about this. Professional development is something that is sprinkled throughout the discussion of this budget. And it is a very large item and one that is under close scrutiny with the state at this moment. Certainly something that will be part of the corrected action plan. And if I'm correct, I'll look to Ms. Oakley. I believe that our professional development plan for the entire school year has been submitted to the state. And they are reviewing that, if I'm correct. I'll look for some clarification. Yes.
What I was asking in regards to the International Baccalaureate program, because I just heard Mr. Rhodes state that the new principal at Chimborazo did receive professional development, and some of the teachers because it's basically a whole new staff. So persons who were originally trained for, well now, about 8 years ago, most of those persons have gone. So, and the money that was placed in the community, the parents, corporations, we raised over $400,000. And when I left, that's the amount of money that was there. But it wasn't in the public schools budget.
I do know that we have sent the principal through our staff development funds, training, things like that. Now, I'm not sure what took place with the money, the other.
I know they bought some other items through the
Yes.
PCA, but.
So you asked about staff development and a plan
Yes.
to the state. So, we have a memorandum of understanding, and the state has narrowed our focus around, which is based on the data and based on the scores that we have, around training principals on the written, taught, and tested curriculum. And we just had training yesterday. So that's our overall arching focus, is to improve Tier 1 instruction. And so our next step at the state is to have a teacher leader program that will start in March, where key teachers from the school will also receive that training with assistant principals, so that we have continuity in ensuring that people can execute the training. The state, we're doing a partnership with the state. If there's any new professional development requested, so if Mr. Rhodes and I decided we wanted to do training on something that was new, there is a form that I fill out and send to the state, and they approve it or not. Right now, they've approved everything that we've asked for training, but that's the process. If there's anything new, if it was in the previous year or has been done in the past, then we don't need to ask to move forward. But if we're doing a new program or a new PD offering, it has to be approved by the state. The Office of School.
The next item is our dual enrollment program, and certainly the question would be, well, if they don't go through the dual enrollment program, who's going to teach them? This is the $220,000 is only the amount that we pay over and above to J. Sargent Reynolds to participate in the program. Certainly, if they were not taking those dual enrollment classes, some of them go to J. Sargent Reynolds, some of the students, and some of them do not. So if these students were back in all regular classrooms, some of those classrooms will be a little larger. The next one I know we've all been waiting to talk about, K12 Insight, or Let's Talk. I know many folks are not pleased with that particular piece of software, and certainly if that's the will of the board and the superintendent, we will eliminate that contract. Many of us are tasked with responding to the public. So
I've not ever heard anyone say anything good about it, so why don't we just do it?
thank you. Thank you. Done.
Great.
Thank you. The next couple are very straightforward, and certainly ones that I don't think require a lot of conversation. Students at the Governor's School, participation in the Math Science Center, and again, back to our discussion about when we look at the appropriate secondary staffing, and we look at the equitable nature of secondary staffing, if we staff at this ratio, which of course is below the state standards of quality with which we get funded, we would be able to reduce that number of middle school, identified middle school teaching staff. The next one is small. It's just the match for the Altria grant that supports the academic coaches for athletes. We talked a little bit about the RCEA. That's going to be all locally funded next in fiscal 19. $700,000 that supports between 20 and between 30 and 40 students.
Sorry, is that FTE, is a contract, what is that?
I'm sorry, that we have students that are intellectually disabled that, and I don't know the admission criteria to get into the program. You guys will have to help me.
So in a nutshell, the Richmond Career Education and Employment Academy is the first public charter school for students with disabilities. It is for students, it primarily serves students who have autism or intellectual disabilities. The focus is on increasing post-secondary outcomes. So they have their specific curriculum that's different from RPS curriculum that was designed in collaboration with VCU and the ACE consortium there in partnership with the Virginia Department of Education. So that those students, their curriculum and their programming is much different. They go to work sites, they have internships, things like that, so that when they graduate, they have a greater likelihood of living independently, working independently, and things like that. We did embark into that partnership with a 5-year grant with the Virginia Department of Education, with the initial outset in our charter that we would gradually own that program and own the school. So each year we financially have been more accountable for the cost of running the school. So it wasn't that this year we had the grant, and then next year it's all on us. So the idea of the families and the students is that we will push forward with this. So while it is for a small number of students, as you all know, the higher needs typically allocate more resources because we want those students to have positive outcomes. So I would implore upon you to continue this partnership because it has been very, very successful for that student population.
The next item, this one is a little convoluted, like the other ones haven't been. In our current year budget, you all remember the $8.3 million of fund balance. Well, $2.3 million of that was appropriated by the city into our operating fund. I don't know if they're going to count that as recurring or not, and if it's going to be in our base budget. I assume that it will, and that's why they appropriated it that way. That has been earmarked at this moment for technology, and most of it has been spent this year for technology. At this moment, it is not budgeted in 19 for technology. It's sitting just as a placeholder. So again, I don't know if the city's going to keep that as recurring funding or not. So that's why I haven't stressed us by budgeting that at this moment. But this certainly could be an area that could be redirected for something else. We'll just have to wait and see how the city works through their funding for the school year. The next item, textbooks. We're required, based on our state SOQ and the local match, to spend about $2.4 million. We spend $4.2 million. We are not required to spend the other $1.8 million. We have an after-school high school tutor program, Twilight, that's locally funded. It's $50,000.
Okay, so here we are with after-school tutors in 3 places. And with the Twilight, is there something special about them that they're not included in the other one that we already talked about, the extended day services? And Twilight, can you differentiate those 3?
I can't. I can tell you that there are 3 pots of money that are all local. In addition, we have federal funds and state funds.
These are all
local funds. Yes,
funds for after-school
yes,
tutors.
So the Twilight funds are for high school students and for really seniors who need individualized instruction to ensure that they graduate. It's for students that need to either pass an SOL test or who need to be taking another online course because they need that to graduate. So it's a very targeted group of children that, to increase the graduation rate.
Is Twilight program at every high school?
High school.
I just want to make note about the textbook ones, the $1.8 million. This is another parent event, because I think that textbooks sound great, but I think that I would suspect that a lot of this is workbooks.
Only if it qualifies as the primary teaching tool.
Right. And so my kids come home every year with like several large yellow pages-ish sized workbooks that are essentially 99.9% empty. And so, I'm a purger, so I quickly purge it, but it does, feel wasteful that there are probably 30 of these per classroom going home as such. And this might be an opportunity to, allow teachers to be able to make a choice if they would like to use the workbook and get a significant amount of use out of it. But I know many teachers that are purgers like me that kind of also, now I've started getting them at the beginning of the school year, like, hey, this is the thing I get, and I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of this now. This might be a place to, allow teachers to be able to make the choice as to whether this textbook, workbook, what have you, is useful for them.
Only a couple more, and Virginia School Boards Association, we don't have to pay that fee. I would think that you would advocate to continue to pay that. We pay a healthcare consultant to help us with because we're self-insured, to help us with monitoring the rates that we pay to doctor groups, hospital groups for drug costs. We would not have to pay that. And we talked about the Yale initiative. The last one on the list, we have not fully taken advantage of the K-3 funding. You may remember we talked a little bit about the Robert Bob report that said get rid of 138 K-3 teachers and you could save $2 million. This one goes the other way. This one says for an investment of about $350,000 because just about $1.3 million is still available through the state. We could add these 18 teachers. We could. Yes, ma'am. Now, the only limitation would be at a couple of schools that don't have space. And we would be limited at 2 or 3 schools that don't have space. I bring this to you today, and as I said when we started, this doesn't have an elimination of a person out of the superintendent's office or out of the school board office, out of the payroll office, out of the human resources office. And I'll tell you why it doesn't. I believe that we are at a point in time that our new superintendent is going to look at our school system. We're going to do an equity audit. We're going to do a budget audit. We're going to look at our structure. I think that we should at this point work through that process. Everything that we're doing is going to be valuable as we work through our vision, mission, strategic plan. Everything that's in all of this material, the things we're talking about today, there's enough on this one page that we don't know about our school system that take us months to go through this. So we would all be at the same base knowledge. I would encourage us to understand, though, the timing of where we are, that on the 20th, you will have a school board approved budget that's going to go forward to the mayor. So I'm hoping we can continue to work through this information that we have and develop our budget. I will look to you, the school board, and the superintendent. If it is the direction of the school board that we want to look at a blanket reduction across the board, that's something that if you share with us, we certainly will do that. Yes, sir, I know.
So, David, if I could ask, I appreciate you saying that. And my request from the board is, as David noted, we're about to undergo a strategic planning process, have both of these audits done. My commitment to you is at least threefold. One, that we use those processes in the plan to then begin our budget planning in September. Or, yes, but we need time to go through everything and get the plan done. What can start earlier, number two, is a process of education for myself and for all of you. I think it's important that we don't just do this right around the time of budgets, but that we spend the time to really deeply understand what all these things are. And I think that's not just here, but going out and seeing some of these programs together to get a deeper, more nuanced understanding. And then third is to not make any big budget moves right now in terms of staffing ratios or other things, in part because I would like to reserve those for a thoughtful plan that comes out of our thinking over the next couple of months. And also there are significant instructional implications to some of these things that I want us to have the opportunity to really grapple with. So yes, right here it's numbers, but also what goes through my head is knowing some of these changes, what the effect they have in classrooms, and that's pretty complicated. So that would be my request to the board.
Yes, ma'am.
So, all right, maybe this is something now, in light of what the superintendent just stated, regarding the textbooks, the additional textbooks. Did you state that those are books that will go in the media center, or that's just additional classroom textbooks?
These are actual textbooks. The library books are a different item. And if I'm going from memory, if I remember correctly, we only budget $60,000 a year for library book replacement for the school division. I believe that's correct.
It's more?
200,000? Sorry. There are 3 line items in that budget, and I remember the 60.
And the reason I'm asking that also is just in light of the last board meeting we had, just to be mindful of our diverse population, and just to make sure we are inclusive of having books with Latino, Asian, African American, more sets of books and opportunities for our students. So I guess when we sit down to make a big budget per se, put that together, and we're mindful of that. And since we're doing away with less talk, just trying to see where we can get some money in order to fill that void. So that's why I asked what type of textbooks. So we're not talking about trade books.
We can certainly get you the list of the most recent purchases of textbooks. The most recent $4.2 million will show you what we purchased. $4.2 million. So with that, that's primarily the new information that I wanted to go through. However, our instruction folks, and I don't know how our technology is going to work tonight. I have made sense of all of this supplemental information. I will tell you what it is, and it is extremely valuable. These are counselors by school. These are gifted teachers by school. These are ESL staff by school. Specifically, a question came up today about advanced or AP offerings at each school. There's a comparison of the AP offerings at each school. And then there's staffing listings for music and chorus and dance and theater. And then a comparison of middle school athletics. We had the VHSL list, but there seemed to be an error in it, so I'll have to forward that to you. So again, lots and lots of good information that you have talked about through the planning process so far, and we wanted to make sure that we had this for tonight, or for today, this afternoon. We're only about 15 minutes left in this particular work session. I will ask the board and the superintendent, there are primarily 2 big areas left with this board's priorities that I think that we do want to go through. One of them is the realignment discussion. And I'm kind of looking at that as a standalone. The submission of that was pretty much as a standalone discussion item. And then there are some additional priorities that the board has submitted. A few of them are instructional, most of them are support. For example, elimination of the hub transportation system, and what would that cost? So between the last few minutes tonight and next week, we would need to get through those priorities. Again, some probably 12 or 15, maybe 18 items, plus the realignment plan. And then have the board, maybe by vote, determine what is going to be adjusted to the original proposed budget. You may take the raise out. You may take the $50 supplement out. You may take RCEEA out. And you may put all of these things back in. So what we've attempted to do is price them and give you something that you can determine about what you'd like to add to the budget that ultimately would go to the mayor and then to the city for funding. So that's our schedule and our timeline for the remainder of tonight and next week, with the anticipation of having an approved budget on February 20th. Yes, ma'am.
I do have a question. I just want to make sure I'm reading this right. Like on page 2. And we're looking at the gifted and talented. So we have the space, number of school service, pull out GT. Can you just explain the pull out GT, push in, and what is this 2016, 2017? Is that a contract comparison in the?
Yeah, yes, ma'am. So if you look in column 3, the number of school service. So Ms. Johnson, for instance, she services 3 schools. And so she has 18 students that are pulled out and have specialized programs or pull-out programs. And she also pushes into classrooms. So she will work with teachers with highly able students as well as gifted students to push in. And so we wanted to give you a comparison between the number of students in each school from our Aspen system, from our school information system. So for instance, at Bellevue, there were 12 students identified as gifted in 2016, and then there are 17 currently. Is that helpful?
Well, I have a question too then. Barbara Bernardo and Donna Smith at Mary Munford, their pull-out GT students, are they all at Mary Munford in this line? Or are they the 3 schools that they serve? I think, and that's true in all of these. Michelle Johnson, pull-out GT students, 18. Is that all 3 of her schools or just at Bellevue?
That's at Bellevue.
Okay, thank you.
So on the first column on the left-hand side, you'll see that that's a school. And if you travel, horizontally, that travel across, and that's how it's reported by school.
I remember earlier, Mr. Rhodes, can you hear?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you. This is for 16 and 17, right?
Yes, ma'am.
But as we move into the new year, I recall earlier you mentioned that you had some plan in place to increase the number of students that will receive services in this program. Is that to come?
It's reflected here. So that's the 2016-17 is 16, and then 17-18 is the 17 data. And so they're working to push into those classrooms more with those highly able students and those Title I students. Yes, ma'am. And that's with the number of staff that we have currently. If additional talented gifted teachers were to be hired, that would permit a redistribution. Yes, ma'am.
Question. Why is it such a huge disparity? I'm going back to sheet number 2 with these pull-out, the gifted talented students. It is a huge disparity with our majority of our schools in comparison to Fox, Holton, and Mumford.
So, not knowing the specifics, my hunch is that gifted and talented identification is largely a reflection of family income and not innate ability. And so I think there's a real equity issue here that we have to investigate and rethink how we think about quote-unquote gifted and talented.
So my next question, are we looking at the same grade levels when we look at the eligibility or those schools, are they picking up grade levels that the other schools doesn't pick up? So, for an example, Holton, they, in their eligibility, they look at kindergarten, first and second. But Blackwell would look at just first and second.
No, they look at the same, the process is the same for all of the schools in terms of.
Sure.
Yes, ma'am. We have the same process for each one of the schools. Whether it's applied the same way, I can't guarantee that it's applied in the same manner across all of the schools, but we do have a common process across RPS. So it's not like, one school, they do it in first grade, they start in first grade, identify in first grade, and the other, we identify in second grade, if that's what you're asking.
So my next question will be an offline question.
Okay.
Maybe just to build off of Ms. Page's comment, it's not just the raw number of students that we're serving, it's also, if our plan this year is to increase the number of students taking advantage of this program, we've had a 40% increase at Mary Mumford, but in many other places, it's been flat or declined, like at Carver, it went down. So it seems like whatever plan we have in place is continuing to exacerbate the situation that we've just outlined.
So the challenge, once again, is staffing and not having enough teachers. You can see how many teachers we have spread across all of these schools, and so project impact that we're working to implement. We're working to identify highly able students, and so it's just going to take time.
TJ has a diploma program, which is somewhat tantamount, to the AP.
That's why they're AP course summits, because they have an international baccalaureate program that is a substitute.
That's their substitute.
So then I'm looking at George Witt, which does not have an IB program.
Right.
And Armstrong.
So I can tell you that the AP program has not been, we have sort of resurrected it this year. It had not been a focus in the last couple of years. And so we had a large grant about 7 or 8 years ago from Mobile Exxon. We did a big push for AP strategies. We had a person that monitored that and all of that. And then, and I'm going to be honest and tell you, when I came back this year, there was very few AP courses in place. Materials, very limited materials had been bought, and Mr. Rhodes just came on last year. And so we did provide materials for all the teachers that are teaching AP this year. We have been supporting them through training. But yes, this is an issue, but you also have to build a pipeline to AP. And so you have to offer rigorous coursework, you have to support the students, and you have to build that pipeline for them to be able to take that advanced class. And so,
Thank you, Vicki. Let me just add, to fulfill the commitment I made in the 100-day plan, we are likely going to need to put some money towards some positions for this. And I appreciate Vicki raising the building the pipeline, but I also see this as plant a stake in the ground and the pipeline will begin to develop. And I firmly believe that there are more than 8 kids at Franklin who can be in an AP class tomorrow. And so I want to make sure that in the interest of equity, we begin to take that step for next year.
So my next question, when we look at the AP offerings, what about the middle school? Because in the middle school, a lot of our middle schools do not offer the algebra so that the students can be eligible to apply to the specialty programs. And when we talk about rigor, if our kids are not able to take advantage of the AP courses, that's going to decrease their opportunities or when it's time to go to college, because colleges look at the rigor of the program.
So Ms. Page, we do offer algebra in every middle school, but I do understand your concern. And Mr. Cameron is right. You know, we have bright kids in all of our children. We have children that previously could be tapped and told that they can do this type of coursework. So there's a lot of work to be done around that. And I salute you all for bringing it to your attention and looking at it. We also offer science in our middle school for children. So we do though offer algebra in every school, in every middle school.
What is that? I think a piece of the strategic plan will necessarily have to be looking at the rigor of our instructional program pre-K to 12. And how do we make sure that there is an aligned, rigorous pathway for all of our kids? And that means looking at curriculum, looking at assessment, looking at intervention, everything. And I think that's the core of what we do. And kids will never achieve greatness if we don't ask them to achieve greatness. So that's what we're doing.
Okay. Good old TJ alum here, looking on page 6. TJ does not have a chorus, does not have a teacher for a chorus. This is not an option for kids at TJ. That doesn't have anything to do with IB. The chorus is one of those things that you build the program. If you don't offer it, and you have that program, I want you to believe. But that's true. And also, I would point out that Binford needs more than a half-time person for chorus. I mean, that's their focus. They're supposed to be a magnet school for the arts. They've got their full-time dance person, they've got their full-time theater person. And I'm sorry, but we need to, that's the art school. That's why we were talking about closing them. I wasn't on board, but I was listening to the conversation because they didn't have enough kids at Denver, and so they came up with this, making this arts school, and so people would come, and they have come. So let's build kids.
I also think it's worth, as we have new leadership and this is a new era, kind of challenging some of the systems that we have in place. And I mean, when we're looking at gifted programs, right? I mean, the schools with the most middle-class students have the most kids in there that are gifted, and it is not a secret that parents want to have that label put on their kid, and so they're going to push to get their kids into the program, and ultimately I take issue with this whole notion that certain kids are gifted or not, and it's not like a universal thing where you're just necessarily good at everything, right? You might be very good at math and not very good at something else, and so. And then with AP courses and such, I mean, I have a kid that was placed into double accelerated math, and she's in that class, but it seems I have mixed feelings about it, because I don't even know that it's really necessarily developmentally appropriate for her to be in that class. And so there's this, there is this reality that's been created by this universal belief that every kid should go to college, and this monster that we've created that feeds into getting these labels and things in order to make that happen and to increase your kids' chances. And, I very much believe that, Richmond Public Schools will not be Henrico Public Schools or Chesterfield Public Schools, and, and I think that, can we be the school system that is about being developmentally appropriate and that isn't necessarily looking to, create these arbitrary labels that, that then emphasize these idiosyncrasies which may not even really matter.
Madam Chair, I'll look to your leadership and superintendent's leadership. We are just past 6 o'clock. I understand there are other activities this evening. There's also dinner back there. We did have one person in the audience that wanted to ask a question. I don't know if this is the appropriate time, but
I did. Thank you very much. My name is Norma Seymour, and I'm with the League of United Latin American Citizens. And my question is around the three tutoring, the extended day services, Aspire,
yes, ma'am.
and Twilight. My question is around how that is inclusive with our non-English speaking students, specifically the Latinos. Just from 2006 to 2016, there's been a 293% increase in this population. It now makes up 14% of RPS students, up from 4% in about a decade ago. So working with programs in RPS, my question to the board as far as with the budgets and everything that you've discussed today, how are those three after-school tutoring programs available to the populations that don't have access to computers or internet, and just to get them on track, just to stay in school, let alone graduation, as we know that their graduation is below 40%. How do we change that?
I certainly understand your question. Anybody respond to how the after-school tutoring is able to support ESL students?
So there's
Hello?
So the schools have those funds to invest in after-school tutoring. Not all of them are computer-based. Many of them are face-to-face. The extended day programs, those are programs that are face-to-face programs with students. And for instance, George Ritt and Huguenot High School here have programs that are specifically for students that are English language. And so, as we learn and grow, those programs will continue to grow, and those funds are available for them to develop, special programs for the students that they serve.
Thank you. I was speaking specifically to, I believe, Aspire and Twilight were to help students with SOLs, seniors, getting ready for graduation. So those programs specifically.
So many of the digital programs that we have, correct me if I'm wrong, but they're translated into multiple languages. So Ingenuity and others have they're multilingual to allow students to access them using various things.
And Mr. Rose, if I could add on, the process Aspire. So one of the things that the placement committee looks at when students are brought forth, because we have students with disabilities who may be recommended, students with limited English proficiency that may be recommended, and if that is an option that the team determines is appropriate, then they come back and say what supports are needed for those students. Currently, I don't believe that we have any non-English speaking students at Aspire, but if that was identified as the appropriate place for them, we would have to collaborate with the ESL department to make sure those supports are brought forward as we do with students with disabilities who need special services as a result of their disabilities. So no one is excluded from those programs, Aspire specifically. In the computer-based piece, I know you had some concerns about access in the homes and things like that. All of the software is provided for the students to use during the day, and they're not required to use it outside of the classroom. If they want to, they can, but there's nothing that's required to be logged on the computer outside of the class.
Board, we will work to make sure that all the remaining priorities that haven't been discussed, we will price those to the best of our ability. Be prepared next week to talk through the realignment plan, the remainder of the priorities. And we'll have a process in place to come forward with the framework of a budget that we certainly can have the board vote on, superintendent discuss, and then we'll be ready to vote on that on the 20th.
Lennon's in the back, taking notes.
Yes, ma'am.
So, to recap, everything that was highlighted tonight in preparation for the next session, we will be prepared for.
We will, yes, we will have all of the items that we talked about tonight. We'll provide those to you as soon as we can. I'd like to think that would be as early as maybe Monday. I can't think of anything that I can't pull together by then, but if there is something, I'll certainly let you know.
So if board members, if you have additional questions or feedback from Mr. Myers, you would need it by?
Maybe try for Monday.
So
Monday, please.
You need feedback by Monday?
Yes.
Well. Okay.
Thank you.
There are no other discussions at this time. Our meeting is now adjourned.